In the vast cosmic arena of human history, civilizations rise and fall like stars, burning brightly before fading into darkness. But what happens in the shadow between these great lights? What worlds emerge when empires crumble and the dust of collapse settles into new forms? Imagine standing atop the Palatine Hill in the year 476 CE. Below you, the eternal city of Rome, once commanding 80 million souls across 3 continents, lies diminished, its Western emperor deposed by a Germanic warlord. The mightiest political structure the Western world had ever known has fractured like ancient pottery, its pieces scattered across a changed landscape. But this isn't a story of endings. It's a story of beginnings. For what emerged from this colossal transformation wasn't simply chaos. It was the birth of nations, languages, technologies, and institutions that would eventually shape our modern world. The so-called Dark Ages contained more light than we've been led to believe. What if everything you think you know about the medieval age is wrong? The Roman Empire didn't die with a thunderous crash. It faded, like daylight surrendering to dusk, as Germanic tribes carved territories from its imperial body. These weren't mindless barbarians, but complex societies with their own traditions of law, leadership, and loyalty. In the East, Rome continued. The Byzantine Empire, Greek-speaking, Christian, and sophisticated, would preserve the imperial flame for another 1,000 years. Constantinople stood as the most magnificent city in Christendom, its walls impregnable, its wealth legendary. But as one world continued, another was being born. Across the Arabian Peninsula, a merchant named Muhammad received revelations that would transform half the known world. Islam exploded from the desert sands with unprecedented force, creating the largest unified realm since Rome itself within just a century of the Prophet's death. By 732 CE, Islamic armies had pushed deep into France before being halted at the Battle of Tours. This wasn't just a military encounter. It was the collision of expanding worldviews that would define medieval geopolitics for centuries. What happens when civilizations meet not just on battlefields, but in marketplaces of ideas? As Islam flourished in the south, a new power rose in the north. Charlemagne, king of the Franks, conquered vast territories across Europe. On Christmas Day 800 CE, Pope Leo III placed a crown upon his head, declaring him Emperor of the Romans, a deliberate resurrection of imperial authority in the West. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed the Roman dream might be reborn. But how long can one man's vision survive beyond his lifetime? The 9th century brought terror from an unexpected direction. Norse longships appeared like specters from the mist, their dragon prows announcing doom for coastal communities across Europe. But who were these Vikings really? Not just raiders, but explorers, traders, and colonizers who established settlements from Newfoundland to the Black Sea. They founded Russia's first dynasty, conquered northern France, Normandy means land of the Northmen, and reached America 5 centuries before Columbus. One Viking settlement in particular would change history. In the cold waters off Britain's coast, Norse raiders established a foothold on the island of Iceland. Here, isolated between ice and ocean, they would preserve the sagas and stories of their ancestors, creating one of the richest literary traditions of medieval Europe. But the Vikings weren't the only ones preserving knowledge. While Europe struggled through political fragmentation, monasteries became islands of learning. Monks laboriously copied ancient texts, preserving classical knowledge through the turbulent centuries. Meanwhile, in Baghdad, the House of Wisdom collected and translated works from Greek, Persian, and Indian traditions, advancing mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. We stand in the shadows of their patient work each time we use algebra, algorithms, or read translations of Aristotle. But across the world, other medieval societies were developing in parallel, each with their own remarkable stories. While European knights clashed in territorial disputes, China's Song dynasty was experiencing unprecedented economic growth. Their population surpassed 100 million, a scale unimaginable in fragmented Europe. The Song pioneered paper money, mass-produced books centuries before Gutenberg, developed gunpowder, and created mechanical clocks. Their cities dwarfed anything in the West, with Hangzhou containing over 1 million residents when London barely held 15,000. What if the most advanced civilization of the medieval period wasn't in Europe at all? In West Africa, the Mali Empire controlled vast gold reserves that fueled global trade networks. When its ruler Mansa Musa made his pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, he distributed so much gold that he crashed the Egyptian economy for years. His legendary wealth funded the great university at Timbuktu, a center of learning where over 25,000 students studied mathematics, astronomy, literature, and law. Manuscripts from this period are still being discovered, challenging our understanding of African intellectual history. But as these societies flourished, Europe was finding its own path forward. By the year 1000, the foundations of modern Europe were emerging from the feudal landscape. A revolution was underway, not a sudden uprising, but a slow, profound transformation of society, technology, and thought. The three-field system increased agricultural yields by a third. Heavy plows opened northern European soils for the first time. Watermills, the industrial engines of the age, harnessed rivers for everything from grinding grain to fulling cloth and forging metal. But perhaps the most visible symbols of medieval ambition rose toward heaven. The great cathedrals represented technological marvels equal to our modern skyscrapers. Notre Dame, Chartres, Canterbury, these weren't just places of worship, but statements of civic pride, technological prowess, and spiritual aspiration. How did societies we consider primitive build structures that still leave us in awe 8 centuries later? As cathedrals rose from stone, universities emerged as new centers of intellectual life. Bologna, Oxford, Paris, these institutions created the model of higher education we still use today. The degrees, academic robes, and structure of knowledge into disciplines all have medieval origins. But not all medieval innovations were peaceful. In 1095, Pope Urban II called for an armed pilgrimage to recapture Jerusalem from Muslim rule. The response was unprecedented. Thousands took up the cross in what would become the First Crusade. After 4 years of marching across Europe and the Byzantine Empire, the Crusaders breached Jerusalem's walls. What followed was one of history's most infamous massacres. Christians slaughtered Muslims and Jews alike, wading through blood up to their ankles, according to contemporary chroniclers. This moment crystallized the religious conflicts that would shape medieval geopolitics for centuries. Were the Crusades religious fervor, political calculation, economic opportunity, or all three combined? While Europe fought over Jerusalem, an even greater force was forming in the steppes of Central Asia. Under Genghis Khan, the Mongols created the largest contiguous land empire in history, stretching from Korea to Eastern Europe. Their conquests killed an estimated 40 million people, around 10% of the world's population. Entire civilizations were erased, yet the Mongol peace that followed created the first truly international exchange network, allowing goods, ideas, and, unfortunately, disease to travel as never before. And disease would soon transform the medieval world in ways no conquest could match. The 13th century marked medieval Europe's golden age. Population had been growing steadily for centuries, reaching unprecedented levels. Trade networks expanded, towns grew, and a nascent middle class emerged. Then catastrophe struck. Beginning around 1315, a series of failed harvests triggered the Great Famine, killing perhaps 10 to 15% of Northern Europe's population. This was just a prelude to an even greater disaster. In 1347, merchant ships docked in Sicily carrying more than trade goods. The Black Death, likely bubonic plague, had arrived in Europe. Over the next 4 years, it would kill an estimated 1/3 of Europe's population, the deadliest pandemic in human history until that point. The scale of this demographic collapse is almost unimaginable today, equivalent to more than 2 billion people dying worldwide within just 4 years. How does a society continue when 1 in 3 people simply disappears? But from this catastrophe came transformation. The
The sudden shortage of labor empowered surviving peasants and workers who could demand better wages and conditions. The rigid feudal system began to crack. New questions about religion, authority, and society emerged. The seeds of modernity were paradoxically nourished by this enormous tragedy. Medieval society was built on hierarchy, from God and his angels to kings and nobles, down to commoners and serfs. But this order wasn't as rigid as we might imagine. Magna Carta in 1215 forced King John of England to accept that even monarchs were subject to law. Though initially a baron's charter, it established principles that would eventually expand into broader concepts of rights. Peasant revolts erupted across Europe. The Jacquerie in France, the English peasants' revolt, the Bundschuh movement in Germany. Though brutally suppressed, they revealed the limits of aristocratic power and the capacity for common people to organize. In the shadows of castles and cathedrals, ordinary people created their own forms of resistance, community, and meaning. Guild members protected their craft knowledge and secured fair prices. Towns won charters guaranteeing freedoms from aristocratic control. Women, though legally subordinate, often ran businesses, managed estates, and sometimes wielded significant influence. What if the real story of the Middle Ages isn't found in kings and conquerors, but in the resilience of ordinary people navigating a world of uncertainty? Medieval innovation didn't happen in laboratories, but in workshops, fields, and monasteries. Yet the technologies developed transformed human capability as profoundly as our digital revolution. The mechanical clock, first appearing in European monasteries around 1300, didn't just measure time, it changed how humans perceived it. No longer flowing with seasons and daylight, time became standardized, mechanical, and eventually commodified. Eyeglasses, first developed in Italy around 1290, extended productive years for craftsmen, scribes, and scholars. The windmill captured energy from the air itself, while the horse collar and heavy plow transformed agriculture. But perhaps the most revolutionary medieval technology came near the period's end. When Johannes Gutenberg combined movable metal type with a modified wine press around 1450, he created something world-changing. The printing press democratized knowledge, standardized languages, and eventually undermined centralized control of information. Within 50 years of Gutenberg's invention, over 20 million books had been printed in Europe, more than all the books hand-copied by scribes in the previous 1,000 years. But as this information revolution unfolded, another world-changing event was taking place. In 1453, Ottoman cannons breached the supposedly impregnable walls of Constantinople. The 1,000-year Byzantine Empire, the last direct link to ancient Rome, finally fell. Greek scholars fled west, bringing ancient manuscripts and knowledge that helped fuel the Renaissance. Meanwhile, the Ottoman Empire emerged as a major power that would dominate the Eastern Mediterranean for centuries. In the West, another seismic shift was underway. Spanish and Portuguese explorers pushed into the Atlantic, seeking new routes to Asia's riches. When Columbus reached the Americas in 1492, the very end of the medieval period, he initiated the most significant ecological, demographic, and economic exchange in human history since the development of agriculture. The medieval world was ending, not in catastrophe, but in expansion. So why should we care about the medieval period today? Because our modern world was literally built on its foundations. Our political geography still reflects medieval realities. The borders of France, England, Spain, and other European nations were largely shaped during this period. Our legal systems draw heavily from medieval precedents. English common law, the basis for legal systems across the former British Empire, including the United States, evolved during this period. Modern banking emerged from medieval Italian trading cities. Double-entry bookkeeping, insurance, and banking partnerships all developed to facilitate commerce in places like Venice, Florence, and Genoa. Universities, hospitals, parliaments, mechanical clocks, eyeglasses, paper money, checks, novels, musical notation all have medieval origins. Even our languages bear the medieval imprint.
English is a perfect example, a Germanic base with substantial French influence resulting directly from the Norman conquest. These aren't just tourist attractions, they're living connections to a formative period in human development. Perhaps the most profound legacy of the medieval period is its reminder of human resilience and adaptability. This was an age that began with collapse and ended with expansion, an era that survived apocalyptic plague and produced soaring cathedrals, a time of brutal warfare and remarkable scholarship. The medieval world wasn't simply dark or light, it contained the full spectrum of human experience. In its thousand-year span, civilizations rose and fell, technologies transformed daily life, and ordinary people adapted to extraordinary circumstances. And therein lies the true lesson of the Middle Ages. When we look past the simplistic stereotypes, we discover not an aberration between classical antiquity and modern enlightenment, but a crucial chapter in our shared human story, one filled with struggle, innovation, failure, and triumph. The medieval period teaches us that what appears to be an ending may actually be a beginning. When Rome fell, it wasn't the end of civilization, but the transformation of it. When plague decimated populations, it didn't stop human progress, but redirected it.
In many ways, we are still living in the world the medieval period created, a world of nations rather than empires, of complex religious identities, of universities and banks, of technologies that connect rather than divide. The Middle Ages didn't just happen, they made us who we are. Do you think our own civilization is at the beginning, middle, or end of its story? What shadows and light will we leave for those who come after us? Perhaps we're not so different from the farmers, monks, merchants, and dreamers of 1,000 years ago, all of us trying to build something meaningful in the shadow of what came before, all of us hoping our light will somehow endure.